Today's meeting is webcast and is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 and the motion adopted by the committee on March the 12th, 2021, the committee will proceed with its study of international trade and investment policy, selected considerations concerning COVID-19 vaccines. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses and thank them for taking the time to appear today. From BioPharma Services, we have Renzo DiCarlo, Chief Executive Officer. Please welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear International Committee, I'm really pleased today to be talking to you as obviously a witness on the subject of Canada's trade and investment policy and the trade agreements and your various points that you have. I'm actually going to be covering off all the points in general throughout my talk, so I won't be going item by item, but I will be reviewing each of them in all the comments that I'm making. So again, my name is Renzo DiCarlo. My background and credentials are based on both my academic and business experience. I'm a London School of Economics alumnus in stakeholder theory and research, with about 25 years in pharmaceutical GMP and medical research. So I've done both management of a clinical trials company, but I've also been a GMP producer of radio-labeled antibodies. So I'm very uniquely qualified to talk about just-in-time logistics, which is what we're going through today in Canada in terms of the vaccine rollout. So I'm uniquely qualified to talk to the committee about views on strategies, the policies, on vaccines. I've been the CEO of BioPharma Services here in Toronto for the last 10 years. It's the largest privately held first-in-human clinical research site in Ontario, Canada. We're based in Toronto. And over the last 15 years, we've provided essential drug discovery to over 200 pharma companies around the globe. We have about 250 leading-edge medical professionals who work both here in Toronto, in St. Louis, Missouri, as well as Zurich, Switzerland. And our headquarters in Toronto have been focused on very critical drug development linked to organ anti-rejection drugs, antisense products, as well as COVID countermeasures. So even in the early days of our new normal last year, in April 2020, we actually provided preliminary feedback to the likes of Providence Therapeutics, which, as most of you probably know, is our very own RNA product based in Canada. So in the new normal, it's impossible to separate free trade from COVID safety. Trading blocks, safe travel, and COVID domestic health are intertwined in our new reality. One cannot demand a strong NAFTA, for example, without a safe NAFTA. If the US government wishes to maintain a strong and free relationship with Canada, it also needs to ensure that Canada is safe and healthy. This means that COVID vaccines coming from Pfizer Kalamazoo or Moderna USA need to flow freely to Canada, just like other goods and services do now. Very similar to the comments that my other witness just mentioned a few minutes ago. So Michigan should be treated the same way as Ontario by both the US and Canada, whether it's Ford in Oakville or Ford in Detroit, or Pfizer in Toronto versus Pfizer in Kalamazoo or Pfizer in New York City. So free movement of vaccines across the border should be equivalent to free movement of automobiles from Ford. I think we heard the example of General Motors a few minutes ago as well. So if the US government is limiting our vaccines in our darkest hours, then we too should limit critical goods to them. So this same philosophy should be applied to the UK and also the European trading blocs. Free trade needs to be linked to vaccine-free movement and health and safety. So as we all know, and we're painfully aware right now, infection rates are on the rise in our economy, and our economy continues to weaken as wave after wave continues to batter us in Canada. So wave 3 is not the last wave unless 80% of the population is vaccinated by July 2021. The only true path to success here is getting the first rollout of the vaccines completed as soon as possible with an eye out on the booster dose or third dose. And yes, I'm calling it the third dose or the booster dose. Pfizer has already announced that it needs to apply a third dose, and we should be able to try to conduct that third dose by year end, especially for the variants of concern. So our current normal is not going away and could become worse if we don't start creating trading blocks coupled with safety with very specific countries. Unfortunately, we're rewinding history and we're going back to our roots. This means forging strong alliances with the Commonwealth, the US, and Western Europe. This virus is not going to be under control until certain countries can control their virus, and this could last as long as 5 years. I know it's a painful message, but that's my current belief based on what we're seeing both with our clients in the international markets and with our drug development partners. So we need to limit our trade and travel with countries that cannot control their infection rates, and especially with the variants of concern or the VOCs. And so, yes, I'm suggesting blocking travel to certain countries in North America, Asia, Middle East, and South America until they can demonstrate, or those specific countries can demonstrate, low infections. And we saw that in the media right now. We are talking about limiting travel from certain countries. I think all of you are aware of that. And yes, that also means draconian control measures for people who travel to these specific countries and expect to return home to Canada. It's not the current COVID-19 strain which we should worry about. It is the new COVID-21 that is being created in a country where that country cannot control its outbreak. That we need to plan for. We need to start looking forward into the windscreen versus in the rearview mirror, because up to now we've been looking at data from the past and not data going forward. It's the new VOCs linked to mutations like the B1617 lineage that should be our main focus. And don't be surprised, and if a month or two we start talking about other variants that scientists start to detect. So we need to look forward and create those countermeasures before the virus creates the measures for us. It's not even, so for example, B1617 isn't even measured in certain labs in Ontario, and it's more contagious and lethal than the other VOCs. So this is a breakthrough illness, and these mutations can cause other problems, and also vaccinations are not 100% on some of these severe mutations. So we cannot solve all these problems by adding capacity linked to existing technology, especially when our closest allies should be able to exchange vaccines for us for free trade. Adding capacity on old or current technology will take at least 2 or 3 years to implement. We can surely go faster by obtaining current doses from Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and AstraZeneca. They have the capacity, they're scaling up. Let's find ways on the trading blocks to get those vaccines in our country because it's important to our allies and to ourselves. So this requires that our trading partners support and foster a healthy and free Canada. We need to leapfrog and support Canadian innovators, however, in developing the next generation RNA solution for the VOCs of concern that are mutating into new strains. This is where our spending should go on getting ready for COVID-21 or 22. Our safety and economy really depend on this. Let's support Canadian RNA developers so that the technology resides in Canada, but then we can pick and choose the options for outsourcing to contract manufacturers, whether it be in Canada or abroad, especially in our free trade zone, to produce innovative products. Thank you.
On to Mr. Hoback for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank all the witnesses here on a Friday morning or Friday afternoon, depending where you are in Canada. Mr. DiCarlo, I'm going to start with you. You've made some comments here talking about a third dose. We can't even secure enough first doses right now. And then you talked about this going on for 5 years. Is that general knowledge in your industry that this is going to be an ongoing issue in regards to getting vaccinated, revaccinated, and vaccinated again? And we could be in a scenario like we had this past year going on for the next 5 years?
So I would say that Pfizer has already stated that it needs to have a booster dose at the end of the 2 that are being given. So I would say that probably if we can try to stay on top of things from an administration point of view, that we'd want to try to get the 3rd dose in before the end of the year. And obviously that requires coordination between the federal government and the provinces and the municipalities and the hospitals. But, people are starting to reformulate for the variants, because as they become more serious and the spike protein changes, those vaccines become less effective. So it's very similar to the flu vaccines, right, in terms of having those additional doses.
But as far as our quality of life, we should be able to get back to something that we had post or pre-COVID. Is that not fair to say? Or are we always going to be facing a scenario of lockdowns? I guess it depends on the number of vaccines we get.
I think it depends on, so in terms of your question of 5 years, I think our, pre-COVID is what we used to know as our normal, right? This is what we're living now is our new normal. I don't think we're going to get to pre-COVID normal for at least 5 years. I think there's going to be a trajectory, an evolution, but a lot of that depends on us. It depends on what we do as a country. And I'm saying both in the public sector as also the private sector. Everybody's got to work together to say, how can we manage our country to get as close to the old normal as possible? But it's not going to go back for at least 5 years for many reasons. There's going to be trading blocks and so on and so forth, right?
Fair enough. A little bit of a blow there. But so then, okay, I'm looking forward here then. If we want to see this happen here in Canada, if we want to make sure we're taking care of Canadians and we want to take care of the globe, we want to make sure that we're getting the latest and greatest technology out to everybody. What's the best way to do that, Mr. DiCarlo? Is it like the NDP and the left proposed that we do the STRIPS waiver and we just give the data dump to a bunch of people that necessarily don't know how to do it and have no quality controls? Or is there a different way of doing it? Because we've heard from witnesses saying this isn't a simple vaccine to make. There's a lot to it. What's your expert opinion?
So there are actually a lot of very talented contract manufacturers around the world. So I would say that I think it really is dependent on where they are in our trading blocks. Do we trust the relationship we have with that country? And yes, you can give the recipe, but I think for us, our priority should be our Canadian citizens first, because if we're healthy and safe, we can actually help other countries. That's my personal view.
My next question is to Mr. DiCarlo. Could you kind of enlighten us with how much capital and resources are needed to design, develop, and test new vaccines?
So in obviously pre-COVID, that would have been a lot longer and more expensive. I think right now, due to COVID, a lot of the research that occurred was expedited, especially given Project Warp Speed in the US, number of companies that use. So for example, the RNA technology has been around for 10 years. And so that technology was actually leapfrogged forward because of the increased demand due to the COVID crisis. So a lot of the pharma companies already had a base of technology there that they could draw onto, which is exciting because in the future, what we can use is that RNA technology for HIV, for other cancers and things like that. And it's a great stepping stone. So, but typically, obviously, on the financial side, there's an early phase study that occurs. There's preclinical studies that occur, and there's also late stage studies that occur. The range of spending, depending on the size of the company, it can be significant, but you probably already heard in the marketplace that our Canadian company Providence had asked for $4 to $20 million to take their product from concept all the way to commercialization, but that's how much they budgeted or they forecasted in the marketplace to bring a product to market.
Sorry, Mr. Sheehan, for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much for your presentations, and I wanted to thank everyone very much. It was very thoughtful and very important. So I think the one interesting question that is that I have is going on where Mr. DiCarlo had been speaking about the amount of capital and the innovation and the time needed for creating new vaccines, and you'd started going on about the how this not only could help COVID-19, but it could open up to other things such as in our fight against cancers and things of that nature. And I just wanted you to sort of delve into that a little bit more about how that would could happen. So I'm going to turn it over to you again, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I think two technologies which are exciting. So for example, both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are mRNA vaccines, which existed before for cancer therapy and other products, and even the antiviral vectors that are being used by J&J and AstraZeneca. Those are previous technologies that existed, but COVID sort of leapfrogged them forward because of, unfortunately, the increased demand politically for our economy, and also volume. And so it's a good news, bad news story, right? The bad news story is COVID. The good news story is now we have two new technologies that can be applied to infectious diseases, other, HIV, we can apply them to cancers, things that in the past didn't get the funding and support for these breakthrough technologies. So it's actually an exciting time from a medical technology perspective, even if it was created for the wrong reasons given this pandemic. I mean, the right reasons, you know what I mean, but the wrong motivator because it should have been done probably 5 to 10 years ago and got that funding back then.
So how would a blanket waiver of the TRIPS affect innovation in life science and biotech industry then, in your opinion?
Yeah, this is probably not as much my area of expertise, but in my view that, if you have a waiver, I would say you have more parties at the table that can work together and collaborate both on technology and manufacturing. So that waiver allows a lot of companies to work closer together and a lot of jurisdictions and countries to work together without the restrictions of IP. But the reality is, some of my colleagues I've heard already before, India's got a lot of manufacturing and technology. South Africa does as well. Brazil, some of these countries already have a lot of basic technology. So I think it's more than just the waiver. I think it's the global industries and governments working together closer to develop those technologies.
On to Mr. Abatai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question to Mr. DiCarlo, he mentioned the fourth and fifth, maybe sixth wave. And I'd like to know if governments were aware of these new waves from before or not, due to the nature of the pandemic, the nature of the COVID.
Yeah, I don't know if governments, I can't speak to whether governments in their modeling are aware of a fourth or fifth wave, but I think from a forecasting perspective, you can see that wave one was smaller than wave two. Wave three is bigger than wave two. And I think that many people can foresee that if we don't get the vaccinations out fast enough, and if we don't get ahead of the virus, that there'll probably be a fourth wave. And, there'll be a fifth wave after that. And hopefully if we vaccinate, the fifth wave will be smaller than the fourth wave. But it's a race against time in terms of administrating these vaccines, so we don't get these repeated curves that continue to spike up quickly, especially when the new variants are more infectious.
So based on your, also you mentioned something that you said in Canada, if we don't vaccinate 75 to 80% of all the population by July, we will be exposed to these waves one after the other. So that means the catch up that we're trying to play is out of our hand. Can you confirm that?
I don't know if the catch up is out of our hands, because I think all the provinces and the federal government are trying to work as you know, are trying to work together to expedite that. I think, the ramping up of volume is increasing. I know the government has tried to expedite the vaccination by focusing on the first dose. So, I mean, I'd like to be hopeful. I think we need to plan for the worst case scenarios, but we need to be aggressive, right? So we need to bring in these vaccines as quickly as possible, and we need to get as close to that 70-80% as possible. So
we don't have capacity at the moment to produce vaccines in Canada. We were not ready to do that due to all reasons. And now we are hoping just the vaccine is the only way we're going to face and we're going to win against those waves that are coming. What other solutions do you think we have in hand? For example, closing the ports or closing some of the banning some of the flights. Isn't that the solution? And that should be a measure that we could have taken since day one. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the news right now, but talking about banning Indian, Pakistani flights is the right thing to do. I think it should be very country specific. Yes, we should do it. We should limit our ports depending on the locations of highest infection. We should be aggressive at limiting who comes in so that we can manage both community spread as well as foreign introduced spread. Should we have done it earlier? Yes, I think everyone agrees to that. I think if everyone had to rewind and say they'd be worried about variants of concerns a year ago, they probably would have done it. And that's why I'm saying we should not just be worried about the variant now, we should be worried about the new strains that might be developed. So let's forget about what we did badly before. Let's be aggressive now and start hammering down on those countermeasures. Yeah, Madam Chair, can I jump in or no?
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, so I think we need to distinguish between technology and production. Providence wanted technology support back in March, same time that Moderna and Pfizer wanted it. If we had provided it then, we would have had technology. Where it's manufactured, then Canada could decide that.
So outside the pharmaceutical space, in regards to the educational side of things, right from how hospital workers, nurses, doctors, where do you see there as far as opportunities where Canada and the US could work together and maybe work closer with other like-minded allies like Australia, Europe, UK? Mr. DiCarlo, it looks like you want to answer that question. Maybe I'll go to you.
Sorry, I'm just going to unmute. In terms of education or pharma in the US and things like that, I think, with the US, UK, and Canada, working together closer is extremely important. So, for example, we at BioPharma in St. Louis, we're actually the research center for the US FDA. So here we are as a Canadian company, we are the research center for the FDA in the US, which is great. I mean, in the US, we're BioPharma USA, very proud to be American, but our headquarters are in Canada. So I think whether it's Canada, the US, UK, other countries, whether it's education or pharma, I think being able to work together, especially with our allies, is extremely important. And during this pandemic, we haven't done the best job possible at that. We need to do better.
And then in that scenario, as we're able to bring on new treatments, do we not have a moral responsibility to share that information in a way that allows new technologies to be developed, yet still makes sure we treat everybody else around the world with respect and get them what they require to live healthy lives?
We do. And, for example, here at BioPharma, we're privately held. We're owned by a consortium of doctors. And we actually did a press release back in February when we started to see our Chinese clients suffer and because of COVID. So we volunteered our clinics for R&D gratis at the time. So yes, we have a moral obligation. It's not just about money. We have a moral obligation to all work together, whether it's intercompany or government, and volunteer our services at our worst time. So definitely, for sure. I'm very passionate about that.